you had a rough week. I've been watching, at least on social media, been getting your ass handed to you by some people. First of all, how do you continue? I'll read just the back and forth. So you tweeted why I'm leaving the Democratic Party, Andrew Yang, and then you put the blog up. And then Malcolm Nance, who we had on this week, added you, and he said, because as rich dude, trademark, I secretly, and this is him quoting you in his head, I guess, as a rich dude, I secretly prefer a Trump dictatorship, the end of American democracy, and ridding us of the pesky liberal voters who refuse to see my benevolent techno genius, exclamation point, hashtag buy. And then you said, why so scornful? The world isn't so black and white. And then he came back, and then it was thoughts on this exchange, just with Andrew Yang. I mean, not with Malcolm Nance, because you've had other exchanges as well on Twitter.
Well, certainly his mind reading of me, I was like, wait, that doesn't sound like what's going through my head at all. So I thought I'd just try and say something, moderately pleasant and collegial. And his statement in many ways, Karen's what I'm trying to help with, which is I get people who look up and say, okay, we're in a very, very tough spot. And it seems like there are groups that are working to make things much, much worse, and that we have to do everything and we can to stop them. And there's so much of that frankly, I agree with, and I've done work in that direction. I think a lot of people know that about me. But in my book, and that I wrote over the course of last year, when we were indoors a whole lot, I went through my journey running for president, and then I went through my journey through the system, and I realized that we're being set up. Like our system is set up not to work for us. And anyone who's listening to this who's like, hey, things aren't working, it's like, yeah, it's not working. And one of the reasons it's not working is that we have these incentives, both politically and in the media, and certainly on social media, to be at each other's throats, to cast some other group as as literally our mortal enemies. Like 42% of Americans now think that someone on the other side politically is literally like their mortal enemy. And that's going to lead us to destruction and ruin. And so the question is, how can we actually change up the incentives so that if someone does compromise, they don't get voted out of office, which, by the way, is exactly what's going to happen right now. You compromise, you're probably going to get voted out of office, particularly on the Republican side. If they compromise, they get voted out. So then none of them compromise. Right. How do you make it so that if they compromise, they get to keep their job? And you're not going to believe this, but there's actually a way to do it. And so that's the path I'm taking now, is to try and unlock people from these perverse incentives that are going to destroy us all.
Well, about 6 years ago, I started something called the Party of Lincoln. This is way before the Lincoln Project actually borrowed my without inviting me to the table, which is fine. That's the story of America. I said, why don't more of us Black folk, because we are, to me, the fulcrum of all political spaces, register as Republican, particularly in closed primary states where you can either be Republican or, open primary states where, you can show up and vote for the Republican. So you don't necessarily have to register, but if half of us did, it would give us more leverage as a group, because right now the Democrats can just do what they've been doing, which is ignore us. And then because they know we're going to show up because we don't have too many choices other than to see what happens.
Incredible, Karen.
No. So when I had Malcolm on, I actually, I find you to be very affable. You're a nice guy. I think you're a good person. We've had several conversations, both on mic, off mic. I don't think you're evil. I don't think you're trying to, egomaniac. Maybe you are. I don't know you that well, but I feel like you're a guy that really...
If you are an egomaniac, you do a good job of hiding it.
Well, I didn't say that. But what I said was, you seem like you do want to see this thing work. And I think you really, you're open. That said, when Malcolm came on, what he said scared the hell out of me. Because I'm even, I was like, maybe we need to primary Biden. Maybe we need to find a candidate. Like, no one should feel comfortable. Not Mitch McConnell, not Biden. No one should feel like they got this in the bag. And the only way we do that is to show up politically differently than the way we've been doing it for the last 40 years. Let me finish. So he said, though, Right now, there's a binary choice. And any moving away from Democrats will mean 2022 will go to the Republicans, which then would allow for the ushering in of 2024. And once they have the Senate and the House, they're going to run the table because they don't care, like you said, about democracy. They don't care about humanity. They only care about power. And they're going to rule the country, not through election, but it's going to be like an apartheid system where the minority rule because they already have the local elections locked down. They got the courthouse, the justices, including the Supreme Court, and they could run the table, and Trump is running again. And if he comes back with the House and the Senate and the courts, there's no more rights probably ever again. This democracy is done. So yeah, in a good space, if America's in a good space in a time where we're not at the threat of having everything destroyed, that's a good time to talk about third parties and all that other stuff, but not now. So when he said that, I had to sit back and like take a breath and look at the landscape. We saw January, not a whole lot of accountability with January 6th. And we're seeing what's happening right now, even with the damn debt ceiling. Like they don't care. Chaos works for them. And that's how they can keep power because they don't have anything else going for them. So this chaos, this all this dissension and all this divisiveness is good for the Republican Party. Why would we just hand them 2022 and 2024?
Let's say I agree with everything you just said in terms of the nature of the danger, its seriousness, the timing, all of it. Why are we on the edge of total disaster for our democracy? And the reason is because we have a system that's set up that has actually very, very few safeguards if one of the two major parties succumbs to terrible leadership. Because everyone in that party then falls in line because, again, it's their job. If they don't, you're seeing it in different quarters. But there's been one big counterexample, and that is Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, only Republican senator who voted to impeach Donald Trump and is up for re-election in 2022. Think about that. You're up for re-election in a minute, you're a Republican, and you vote to impeach Donald Trump. Her approval rating right now among Alaskan Republicans is 6%. It is political suicide. So why did she do it? How did she do it? And the reason she did it is that Alaska last year got rid of closed party primaries. So instead of having to go through the 10 to 20% most extreme Republicans, which she obviously loses based on that 6%, Lisa Murkowski now goes straight to the general public of Alaska and goes to the 51% and says, hey, I've done good work for you. I'm a reasonable person. I'm an independent. I've got my own judgment. Maybe you should have me back. So let's say you think that the threat is that you have a malignant actor who's overrun one of the major parties. One way out of it is to make it so that members of that person's party actually can exercise their own independent judgment, maybe stand up for democratic safeguards, maybe even vote to impeach, and still keep their jobs. So that is the mission. There are different ways to tackle the same mission. But if you actually change the system of incentives, then you can unlock people from the thrall of a bad actor who is taking advantage of this really, really fragile system that unfortunately has been built up.
So Andrew, just to kind of build on that point, then, if we're talking about kind of those incentives, I always think about how money travels from the very top. You have the big infrastructures of the DNC and the RNC, and those trickle down all the way to the only thing that trickles down well in this economy is the trickle down of political dollars to smaller states and locals and local municipalities, and how those elections are run and how those people are getting into office. That's one huge incentive, taking out the money in politics. Then we have term limits, because you can have someone, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, spend their entire life in office. And I don't think that's public service at that point, right?
No,
that's not a service, right? So how do you kind of address those two big incentives? And I think, to Karen's point, the debt ceiling hostage crisis that happens every year is absurd. I think we can all agree on that. But I'd love to hear what you think about those two points.
Well, so the mechanics of local races, a lot of people don't understand what Karen was pointing out, which is that in 83% of the districts around the country, it's safely blue or safely red. So when you talk about where the money is going, what's interesting, Sina, is that in a lot of these races, like you don't need to spend a lot of money because, like, someone's going to win on one side, one side or the other. So the money ends up flowing to a handful of competitive races. It turns out that 75% of Americans agree with you on term limits, where they think that sending someone to Washington to be there for 25, 30 years is not the way to go. And I'm going to suggest that if 3 out of 4 of us agree on this one, like maybe we should, maybe we should enact term limits. And one of the byproducts of term limits would be that you wouldn't, frankly, have like 88-year-old, legislators who may expire at any moment. It's like a real risk. It's real uncertainty. Like it's not good for the system. Like one of the things that I want to do is I want to make our system set up to be sustainable for for decades and to come. And so you look at the weaknesses in the system. One of them is that we don't have term limits. We should change that. One of it is that we have this two-party system that has very, very few safeguards. And if you look around the world, UK has 5 parties, Sweden has 8 parties, Germany has 10 parties, Netherlands has 18 parties. And so if you have a party succumb to terrible leadership, it's a problem, but it's not like an existential problem. It's like, oh, that one party went a little crazy, but then you've got like 7 others. But here, if you have one party go crazy, then it could be the end. So that, in my mind, is what you should be trying to change. Is like you got to make the system actually set up to succeed.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of actually, I want to just change gears a little bit. You've run 2 elections now, and you've had a chance to reflect. You've written this book. You've been through the New York. I think the running in the New York mayoral race is probably the only thing worse than that is becoming a New York City football quarterback at the Jets or the Giants, right? I think I feel
for Zach Wilson.
It's a very difficult life, right? Can you? And before you were, impact investor, entrepreneur, nonprofit leader, you were doing all these things to help small communities and to help make a difference in the world. Looking back, what is the difference now between Andrew Yang before the elections and Andrew Yang after these 2 elections?
Well, I've certainly learned a lot. And I wrote in my book about the experiences of running for president because it was such a whirlwind during the time, and I wanted to try and get the lessons down as much as possible. But if you rewind, let's say 3 years ago, no one's heard of Andrew Yang. I'm just like a random dad walking around New York. I run for president and help advance Martin Luther King's anti-poverty platform. And I'd be the first to say, like, it was never my idea. Like, that people like Dr. King had championed it long before I came back around. And then I ran for mayor, lost that race. Right now, I'm just trying to do as much good as I can. And thanks to the people that have supported me, I feel like I'm in a position where I can do some good. And so like, that's what's changed in me, Sina, is that, now I'm very, very, very concerned about some of the problems that Malcolm has laid out, that like we can see and feel it, like things are very, very bad. And then I have to try and do my part to help. And this to me is an approach that would help set us up for some kind of success. And also maybe reward the reasonable among us as opposed to the more extreme on both. Really, I'm more worried about one side, but I mean, there are problems on the other side too. But like the problems on the other side, I'd characterize as more being captive to special interests.
Can you stick around, Andrew Yang? Because I want to ask you a little bit about your upbringing from the book forward.
Yeah. Where am I going? Sure, I'll stick around.
Okay. All right. Because you talk about you were grateful that your parents named you Andrew, a halfway normal name, which now I'm imagining, how do you think and feel about fitting in? And, you share a story about your dad coming home from IBM. I want to talk to you about that as well. 866-801-8255. Andrew Yang, the book is forward. It's more than just policy. It's more than just talking about democracy. He shares a little bit about himself in it as well, which we're going to lean into a little bit, particularly where we are right now, where I feel like we're really at an inflection point. I'm not mad at you wanting to do something about it. We need to do something about it. Is now the time, though. So let's talk about that too. Do you want to be the Jill Stein of this generation? I'm going to ask that question.
Again, there's so many variables. Like it makes me a little bit, it's like anyone thinks like, oh, fast forward to like 24. I mean, I'm focused on 22. Like that's where we should be focused. Like let's get some work done.
Okay, let's get some work done, and let's talk about what that looks like. What does it look like for you to be an independent, and how do we spread that throughout. 866-801-8255. Andrew Yang is here, which I'm grateful for. Cena's here as well. Andrew has a new book out. It's called Forward, Notes on the Future of Our Democracy, which chronicles his run for president, his run for mayor, but also gives us a little insight, peek into his life growing up. Child of an immigrant, of course. And there's one passage where you talk about your dad coming home from IBM, just frustrated that, he and some of his brethren did all of the work. They're doing all of the work, but they're taking orders from people who can't do what they do. And, that frustration of having somebody tell you what to do when they can't, when they're not the ones doing it, only because of being of race or what have you. How did that impact you? And then now that we're in this space where there's so much racial division, raising your children in this, how are you different than your dad?
It made me want to be an entrepreneur because my dad was a frustrated engineer who said that, look, if you can't invent anything anymore at IBM, they make you a manager. And so he said the lab was white managers and Asian engineers. And I heard this when I was 13 years old and was like, well, that sounds terrible. And so then when I went out into the professional world, I wanted to do my own thing in large part because I wanted to succeed or fail based upon my own merits and not whether someone above me decided to, bestow a promotion upon me. So it really made a difference in the way I saw the world. And
now I mentioned before I went to break about your name being Andrew, and you were happy because that gave you some modicum of quote unquote normalcy. And I feel just the opposite now. Like I challenge my students. I have students from all over the world, including a young lady from Taiwan. I have a young man from India, and he's got a name that is so long it goes across the screen, but I've learned how to say it over the last several weeks that he's been in my class. And I think it's important, identity and connection to your culture, because it forces America to become the more perfect union by each of us showing up as our full selves. And that's another question, I guess, was tied to you raising your children. Are you doing it differently?
My kids are growing up so much differently than I am. It's crazy. I mean, if you're the son of immigrants, then your parents don't know anything about anything. And, it's like rolled around. And I remember I went into school sometime 4th or 5th grade, and I went to sleep in the same clothes I wore that day. Like my parents hadn't discovered pajamas or whatever. And then when the kids found out that was the case, then, I was mocked mercilessly. So I will say that my kids have pajamas. They're like, not to throw my parents under the bus. I mean, like my parents did the best they could and were incredibly loving in their way. But, like the next generation, I mean, my kids seem so soft compared to my brother and me. Like my brother and me were just like left to our own devices and, around a bunch of roughnecks. And I look at my kids and I was like, oh my gosh. One of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing is I have a joke, but it's true. I was like, my kids are not rugged enough to survive the American apocalypse. I mean, it's like we got to keep our stuff together so that, my kids can stay soft.
Yeah. Andrew, I guess to build on that, yeah, we were talking over the break, I'm a child of Iranian immigrants and stuff like that. And I've always found a great connection with other children of immigrants as well. As we talked about, there's a lot of similar ways that you were upbringing and stuff. How do people like us, how do first gen Americans, because we're always the ones that kind of straddle that line of we love America, but we also understand the hypocrisy that is baked into the sales pitch of America that brought all of our parents here. And now we're the ones that are like, maybe that's not exactly what they all signed up for. How do you get us to be more involved? How do we start getting engaged in democracy and running for local office more? Because I feel like we're the diverse group of people. We have a lot of us have professional degrees that we're paying debts on still. And then we're the ones that really believe in the promise that America can be a more perfect union.
I relate to that deeply because I love this country, but I struggle with it and struggle with some of the hypocrisy in the sales pitch, the way you described it. And I think that certainly I feel this responsibility now as one of the more highly visible Asian Americans is to try and activate people to do more because the country needs us like really, really badly right now. This country is not doing well. And I do think that people who are relatively recent arrivals to this country have a different perspective. We can show up on the scene and maybe point something out that has been around for a while that everyone has kind of taken for granted. Like, for example, that we are trapped in this duopoly that is completely contrary to the founding fathers' vision, and we know it's not working. So let's change it as quickly as possible. And I know there are concerns, and I know, like, the other side is nuts, and I know all that stuff. but if we were to change the process, I'm going to give you all an example that I think I'll speak to. If the Republicans had used ranked choice voting during their nomination process in 2016, Trump probably never becomes president, because even while he was whomping everyone, he had like 35, 40%. But it's not like he was getting to 51%. Just the other candidates were splitting up the other 60. So not a lot of people were saying Jeb Bush won, Donald Trump too. You know what I mean? Like, that wasn't a thing. So if you'd had a different process, you'd actually have a much better outcome. And so right now, that's what I'm chasing. Is like, let's modernize our process as quickly as possible.
So how does you walking away from the Democratic Party, how does that impact 2022? You said you're fighting for not 2024, 2022. Andrew Yang leaving the Democratic Party, which right now is the one thing standing in the way of absolute tyranny. Absolute tyranny. How does that help us for 2022?
What it helps us do is go to states that are red and blue and purple and say, hey, we should change up the process so more points of view are enabled, have ranked choice voting, have open primaries that liberate our representatives from the extremes. Imagine if a Democrat went into a red state and was like, hey, let's make these changes. People would be like, get out of here. Like, you're a Democrat. You're just trying to mess with things. But if you're an independent saying, look, this works better for everyone, the state that's done this already is a red state, it just means more people can participate, then it has a much better chance of success.
So again, I brought up Joe Stein, Ralph Nader, Ross Perot, which actually
I was going to say Ross Perot. Don't sleep on Ross Perot.
Yeah, I would never sleep on him. Thank you, Ross Perot. We gave us Clinton for 8 years, which was way better than that Bush guy. Are you going to run as an independent in 2024? Is that the game plan? Are you teeing it up? Or are you going to be raising money for independents leading up to 2022 for the midterms, for local elections? What's the game? What's the game plan?
So the Forward Party is open to registered Democrats, independents, registered Republicans. We're going to help candidates that want to change the incentives to make everyone more reasonable. And you can be behind that as a Democrat, as a Republican. So that's what we're going to do in 22. We're going to elevate candidates who want to try and flip a switch, go to open primaries and ranked choice voting, and then get behind ballot initiatives that will actually enable this to happen in real life right now. We can do it. If you're listening to this and this sounds good to you, like, let's make our country more reasonable again. I know that's not a great slogan, but that's really what's needed. And we can do it in November 22. Karen's weighing it. Karen's deciding if she likes it.
No, it's not bad. It's not bad. It has a nice ring to it. And I think it's what needs to happen. I'm just, I was saying now is the time. We can't wait until 2024 to then bitch about the lesser of two evils. That's been my kind of argument. I know folk, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there as well that we're sifting through. So I'm struggling with being responsible with this platform, making sure that we do not derail any progress. I don't want to clip Joe Biden's Achilles, but I feel like we can do better. And so, yes, he's doing the best he can. But that means that Congress needs to, I feel like we're not holding anybody really accountable, and no one is fearing anything, in their local spaces, because the Republicans know we always got Mitch McConnell who's going to gum up everything until we can get back into power, which why is he running unopposed? Why isn't he being primaried? But, I just feel very strongly about that.
Well, one thing I will say too, is that if you look at the appetite for some independent option or third party option, it's actually higher among Republicans than it is among Democrats. So if you were to try and make a case that this could help swing a balance in a way that you're going to like, that case is actually very much there in the numbers.
Okay. All right. Let's take a call or to 866-801-8255. Atlanta. Let's head to Atlanta. Victor, you're on.
Hi, Victor. Hey. Yeah. Hi, Karen.
Hey.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for your run. You kind of pushed the envelope a little last year to force some things that we're seeing now with the $3 trillion budget human infrastructure thing. That was one of the things that I think your running helped stimulate. But
Thank you, Victor, a lot.
I like everything that you're saying, Andrew, but the problem that I've seen over my 40 years of being an active voter is that the problem is at the local level. You hit it right about open primaries. I live in Georgia, where they have closed primaries. So they already know who's voting Democrat, who's voting Republican. If we don't do something about independent redistricting, then none of what you say makes any sense.
I agree with you that these non-competitive districts are a massive, massive problem. And they are a symptom of both the duopoly and party control, where if you're the party in control of a place like Georgia, you're going to draw the districts in a way that really advantages one side. It's one reason why Republicans holding these local offices is so important. So I'm with you. It's a massive, massive problem. But it's a problem that's born of the fact that if you have a dominant party, then they can draw the lines and tilt the balance in their direction. If you had a system that didn't allow for such dominance, then we'd be in better shape. But I'm with you. The redistricting and the gerrymandering is awful.